Welcome back to the channel. I've got another video for you guys. What I wanted to go over today was the top 10 things that will break or you will have problems with on your 350Z. Specifically the DE and the rev up models, not so much on the HRs, even though they do have their own issues. If you don't know, I have a 2013 G37 sedan, which is similar to the 370Zs and as well as the HR models of the 350Zs. I'll do a separate videos specifically for problems with the HR and VHR engine, but let's dive right into it. If you don't know, this is my 2003 350Z. It does have a forged built motor and it is rear mount turboed. But anyways, let's go over the elephant in the room on these year model 350Zs, and that is oil consumption. So I'm basing this off of your Z not being built and turbocharged just as a daily driver. So this engine is a DE, not a rev up. So 2003, 2004 has the DE, which has variable valve timing on the intake side. 05 and 06 is the rev up, and it has variable valve timing on the intake and the exhaust side cams. And they tend to burn a little bit more oil than these ones do. There's two main places that you're going to be consuming oil from, and the first one is pretty easy to fix or to cover up at least, and that's your PCV. As you can see here, I've got a different system routed from the top of my valve cover around to two catch cans. You can do it with just one. I wanted to make sure I had as much flow as possible considering this is boosted. You can't run your PCV back to your intake if you're boosted anyways because you'll go into positive pressure. I tried a system with a bunch of check valves and everything, but it just wasn't able to flow enough, so I was having some issues with crankcase pressure. So that can be fixed with oil catch cams. It's not going to stop the oil from leaving your engine, it's just going to stop you from burning the oil that's leaving the valve cover, and it will catch it in the catch cans. You just empty it out, whatever, but at least you're not pulling it into your intake and burning it. And the second reason is piston rings. All these motors are up to about 150 to 200,000 miles these days. The piston rings start to wear out and you start burning some oil there, and there's not much you can do about that except for rebuild the engine. So that's the first big thing. Number two on the list is going to be valve covers. Valve covers are notoriously horrible on these cars, and thank God that Concept Z Performance, and I think Z1 as well, they've made an aluminum upgrade. Basically, the valve cover gaskets themselves will go bad, but more times than not, it's the spark plug tube seals that will go bad, and you will have oil go down in your spark plug tubes and then leak out down to the header. It can be pretty dangerous. Concept Z Performance has manufactured a aluminum aftermarket valve cover that has replaceable spark plug tube seals. So that's amazing. I wish they would have came out with that a long time ago. So the next time mine go, that's what I'm going to do. The third item on the list is going to be your intake manifold gasket, specifically the one in the middle that separates the upper and the lower intake manifold. And they are notorious for getting vacuum leaks or boost leaks. In my application, I've actually had a couple, and especially if you're running the spacers. The spacers work well, you can get some horsepower with them, but if you're not getting a good one for Motordyne, I specifically cheaped out and I went with the plastic blocks one. It worked for about a year, and then that thing exploded. So if you are going to go with something like that, I would definitely spend your money and get something that is a little bit nicer. So 2003 and 2004 are notorious for having issues with the synchros and the CD transmission. So essentially your first to second gear will be fine, but second to third will get a grind, and typically fourth to fifth will get a grind. So any diagonal shifting will cause grinding with the synchros. Mine has done it for the last 100,000 miles, and it's never gotten any worse, but it's never gotten any better. So I'm just gonna drive this thing until it doesn't shift anymore. There is a really good upgrade. I'll put a link in the description below as well, from Z1, and it is the later year model transmissions. So that's gonna be 2005 and 2006 CD009s. They have upgraded synchros. Those transmissions are notorious for putting down an insane amount of power. A lot of super guys and RV guys will actually put adapter plates and swap those transmissions in, specifically because they make a ton of power. So, or they can handle a ton of power. I should say that, I guess. So yeah, the CD transmissions, either the new years or the older year models, they both are very good transmissions. They feel really nice. They can hold a ton of power. Even though they can hold a ton of power, the earlier models will grind. So I'm at about 500 horsepower. I'm not afraid of this transmission at all. It just makes a little bit of noise. Now this one won't apply to everybody for number 5. especially if you're stock or just have some basic bolt-ons and a tune. But for high horsepower applications on the DE motor, the rod bearings and the connecting rods are not the strongest. This motor can hold up to about 400 horsepower with stock internals before you're going to start having rod bearing failures and possibly throwing connecting rods to the moon. So my engine actually blew up at around 160,000 miles. It spun a rod bearing on naturally aspirated, so it was pretty much stock, had some bolt-ons. I did not have a tune, so that may have contributed to that some. But now it has Manley forged pistons, Eagle H-beam rods, ACL, race bearings, ARP head studs and main studs. It's a fully built bottom end. It's bored over as well. So the motor should be good for around 600 to 700 horsepower. But if you have a stock DE, you'll start having issues with internal engine failure at around that 400 horsepower mark. So that is something, it's not something that absolutely will break. Maybe that should be more of like an honorable mention type thing. But if you do plan on going boosted anyway or having any power adders, you will have problems with that. So go ahead and start budgeting for a built motor. Now, there are plenty of people I know that have put 300,000 miles on these motors, original motors, and not having any issues. Me personally, I had a 2003 G35 coupe before this. I bought it at 150,000 miles and I sold it at 230,000 miles, and I beat the absolute shit out of that car every single day. I was hitting rev limiter, drifting around. I drove it 2 hours every single weekend, there and back, for about a year and a half, and I put a ton of miles on that car, and it was good to go. So I mean, if it had some oil consumption, I just make sure that you're on top of your oil changes and checking it every other weekend or so. And they're really stout motors. Just don't plan on putting a ton of power into them unless you're planning on build the motor, or if you want to swap to an HR. Now that does bring me to another point. The HR engines in the 07 and 08 are stout. Like, you can put a ton of boost on those, run about 600 horsepower on those without having any problems. So number 6 is going to be the door handles. I haven't had this issue yet, but I've seen plenty of people who do. The door handles will just break and then you're locked out of your car. So that's one thing, probably will break. And the next thing is cup holders. Ugh. Yeah, the cup holders are great in this car. One of the known issues that I've dealt with for a long time is the trunk lid on these cars. So if, say you're at the grocery store, you've got a handful of groceries and you're trying to open your trunk lid, you go under here and you pop it, it doesn't raise. That's as far as it goes. So you have to get pretty good at timing it just right, there we go, to get it to actually raise up. Sorry about my mess back here. And that is due to these springs. So Z1 and Concept Z have actually came out with the aftermarket one of these that has more pressure, so when you pop it, it goes all the way up, so you don't have to do it twice. Also in the same category is going to be the struts. The struts go bad. I had to replace mine. When I got it at first, it felt like there was nothing on there, it would just fall. So I think we're on number 9 at this point. One of the problems that I've consistently had on this platform, about every 40,000 miles or so, I have to end up putting wheel bearings on it. At least one. I probably should do them all at once, but if you look back, I just recently replaced this wheel bearing on the Z. So every couple oil changes, whenever you're doing your typical maintenance, jack up your car, see if your wheel shakes around. I have noticed that typically it's the rear wheel bearings that go first. The front wheel bearings are pretty easy to replace and they last a lot longer. And number 10 is going to be the window motors. I've had to replace both the window motors in this car, and I've had to replace one of them in my G35. I haven't had any issues with the G37 or the 370Z platform so far, but typically you'll start seeing issues whenever you roll your window up and then it goes back down halfway by itself. Sometimes you can reset it, but typically that's a good sign that you'll need to do window regulators at some point. Now I have 2 honorable mentions that probably deserve to be on this list, and one of those being the factory catalytic converters. The factory cats, they sound really good. They restrict a bit of power. A lot of people get rid of them, but on both my G35 and my boosted 350Z, I've blown out the cats on both of them. So I don't know if that's just me, but I've had lots of issues, and as well as my G37. I blew out the secondary cat on that one as well. So they are worth quite a bit of money. So once you get one of these cars, I would sell those things to a scrap yard and go get you a set of high flows or art pipes or something. And the last honorable mention to the list, I guess this would be number 12 now, is going to be the factory suspension. The suspension on these cars is fantastic, especially when it's paired with some lowering springs or some nicely tuned coilovers. The rear differential bushing is notorious for going bad on these. There are some good white line upgrade options, and the other bushing I've had issues with is the lower control arm or trailing arm, whatever you want to call it, on the front that attaches to the subframe. Those go bad. All three of my VQs I've owned, I've had to replace those on. So that's a pretty known issue. Even with the small issues that these cars have, I love them to death. This is my third VQ that I've owned. I plan on always having at least one VQ in my life. I know they get a lot of hate sometimes, but when they're built well, they look really good and they run well and they sound fantastic with the right exhaust. I must stress that. But yeah, I'm in no means dissing the car at all. Every car you own will have small issues, especially when you start adding power to them and modifying them. So if anybody has any video recommendations or anything they want me to do, let me know. And I'm gonna get in this car because it is cold as hell outside. I'll see you guys later.